All right, welcome into another day of our daily Devos. Pastor Rick here. We are still in chapter 4 of Philippians. It's the last chapter, so we're trying to make it last. We don't want to say goodbye to Philippians quite yet. We've become quite fond of the people of the church of Philippi. So here we are. So here we are in chapter 4, and yesterday we hit up on 4:6. Don't worry about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So we're going to start right there in that vicinity, but we're going to start back at verse 4 and just read our way into this thing. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Let your graciousness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about anything. But in everything, all things, all of it, through prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, again, your proximity, your posture, your perspective, present your requests to God and then let them go. Present them before the Lord. And then it says this: when you've been able to do that with your proximity and your posture and your perspective and your presenting and you're trusting him with all of it and being willing to let it go, it says, and then the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And it's so one is just the peace of God is beyond understanding. And so one of the key ways that we can really demonstrate the depth of our faith and our relationship with God is in experiencing the peace of God. Because we face situations in our lives where having peace in the midst of that situation just does not make any sense. And so peace is something that God gives. Peace, true peace, is something that people in the world outside of God really can't fully comprehend, can't fully experience. And so it is one of the markers of the Christian faith that is not really duplicatable by the world. Think about when Moses and Aaron were going before Pharaoh and the 10 plagues were happening. The first few plagues that they did were copied by the magicians of Pharaoh's court. But then eventually they got to one of the plagues and they weren't able to copy them anymore. And they basically had to look at Pharaoh and say, we're out, man. Like that was all we had. We don't have any more for this situation. And it really started to draw the line between them and their deep magic, arts that they had access to, and the God of the universe. And so the peace of God is one of the things that we have because it really just surpasses all understanding. And it's going to guard, and this is like a garrison of soldiers, 360 degrees around you, surrounding your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And that is just the core of you, where you have your mind, your thinking, your will, your decision making, your choices, and all of your emotions. All of your emotions flow out of this place of your heart and mind. And so having the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, guarding, an active guard, keeping watch and protecting you from the onslaught of the enemy and preserving that peace. Then it says in verse 8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence and if there is anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. So I don't know if you've ever read it, but Tim Keller wrote a book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And he actually hones in on these few verses in that book in like the practical application section of dealing with grief and pain and suffering. And it's pretty powerful because, so he says, think on these things, like what he wants you to do is to, like the Greek word is like logizomai. And it's like an accounting word. You're supposed to take into account. So it's not just when he says dwell on these things, it's a very strong word of counting up, quantifying all of these things, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely. Like what, and Tim Keller describes it as stopping and thinking and taking into account the high and lofty things of the plan of salvation, of God's great plan for the earth, to recognize that the situation that you're facing is not ultimate, that it's not the only thing going on, and that because God is big enough to figure out all of that, he's certainly good enough, certainly big enough to take care of whatever you're going through right now. And so he says it's like the opposite of what self-help books would try to tell you to get peace, because they would kind of tell you to look down inside yourself and find yourself and try to center yourself. But really, we want to look to him. We want to focus our heart and attention very, very focused on him and all of the great things that he has already accomplished. So whatever is just, honorable, pure, lovely, commendable, if there's any moral excellences, or if there's anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. And then verse 9, I think, takes it to the next level, because then it says, do what you have learned and received and heard from me and seen in me. And then he takes it all the way. And then the God of peace will be with you. So first we have the peace of God in verse 7, that the peace of God is going to be with you, guarding you. But now as we make a choice to think on these things, this wasn't really in my plan, but I think it fits nicely. So let's jump over to Lamentations chapter 3, and I think we want to start in about verse 21. Oh yeah. So basically Jeremiah writing the book of Lamentations here, and he says, I continually remember them. I have become depressed. So in a couple verses earlier, he's like, I've forgotten what it's like to be happy. Like, I've forgotten what prosperity is. I've forgotten what happiness is. Like everything is broken. My future is lost, as well as my hope from the Lord. So he was in a bad place. All right. He was in a very bad place. But here is where everything shifted, is when he said, yet I call this to mind. Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Is there comes a point in our journey where we have to make a decision. We have to choose to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say it, rejoice. To not worry about anything, but in everything, we're going to pray, and we're going to bring our petitions with thanksgiving. We're going to present our requests, and then we're going to take it another step, and we're going to begin to think about what is true and honorable and just and pure and lovely. And then we're going to take it even further. We're going to not stop with just thinking about stuff, but we're actually going to start obeying. We're going to start actually putting it into practice. The things that we've learned and received and heard and seen, we're going to start doing it. And that's when the God of peace will be with you. There's something powerful that shifts when we take our thinking that is like an onslaught of the enemy to try to get us to think incorrectly, and to stop it and to go, no further Satan freight train, no further. I am going to turn my attention onto the faithfulness of God, because if we go back to Lamentations 3, Therefore, I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. What does he call to mind? The Lord's faithful love does not perish, and his mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And I say, the Lord is my portion. And we talked about that quite a bit going through the Psalms. The Lord being your portion, he's your inheritance, something that cannot be taken away from you. Therefore, I will put my hope in him. So I call this to mind, therefore I have hope, and now I'm going to put my hope in him, because the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. And that's where we're at here, is thinking about him, dwelling on these things, and then doing what we've learned and received. Put it into action. All right, we're going to call it quits right there for today. We're going to come back and jump into verse 10 and see how far we get there. Probably the rest of the chapter goes pretty quickly from this point on, but there's just so much in these few verses. I really wanted to take our time as we went through it. So I hope you're encouraged. Drop me a comment down below, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. But drop me a comment with something that stuck out to you today, something that really maybe helped you today. I'd love to hear from you. So with that, God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.